Alexander Beckers, editor-in-chief of the Duran. Alexander, this is a bit of disturbing news, actually. I think it's a little bit disturbing because I was reading reports that are saying that they're now I'm not sure, the UK is like the UK government or what forces are happening, are going on in the UK, that they're actually going after people that were pushing for leave. And in specific, one of the most high-profile cases is they're actually going after Boris Johnson because they said that he lied about the money that was being paid to the EU from the UK, and now they're actually taking legal action against him. But he's not the only one. Can you help unpack this a little bit so that we understand it better?
No. What has been happening ever since the referendum result in 2016 is that obviously there have been very powerful forces in the British establishment that were very unhappy about the referendum outcome and have worked over a night and day to try and reverse and sabotage it. We've discussed that many times in our videos, and we have an ebook out in which we chart some of those discussions and discuss some of the explanations for it. And I've also provided a foreword to that ebook. But what we also have going along in parallel to all of this is a whole succession of investigations and now also of court cases being brought in a clearly orchestrated way by well-funded Remain groups against people who were leaders of the Leave campaign during the referendum. One particular and important target is Aaron Banks, who was a British businessman who partly funded the Leave campaign. There have been endless insinuations that he got his money from Russia and that he was funded by Russia and that he's somehow a cat's paw of the Russians and that this will somehow prove that it was the Russians who were behind the Leave campaign. Those allegations have never been proved, and in fact they're clearly nonsense, but that hasn't stopped endless investigations of him and harassment of him. But now it's taken an even further and in some ways more sinister twist with prosecutions and court action being brought against a whole series of people, including Cummings, who was the head of the Brexit campaign, but now most specifically Boris Johnson, on the grounds that they supposedly said things during the referendum campaign which were untrue, and that in Boris Johnson's case, this was somehow misconduct by him of his public office as a member of parliament. Now, I have to say, this is a ridiculous case. I mean, every time, everybody, every politician who's held a government position were put through some kind of legal process, were put on trial, in effect, for misconduct of public office because they said things in an election which were either not true or not wholly true, then we would have no politicians left. In this particular case, I think Boris Johnson has a strong defence that, you know, he wasn't telling the whole truth about what, you know, some of the things that he said, but the specific allegation that's being made is that he exaggerated the amount of money that Britain pays into the EU budget. He said it was, I think, £370 million every year, and it's actually less than that. I think that's debatable. But in any event, I don't think these sort of cases should be brought at all. And what
I'm
really
actually pulling that up, right? That's why I'm looking at my phone, Alexander. I'm pulling it up right now. Good go. Continue, yeah.
I mean, and what is absolutely stunning to me, though, is that the court is entertaining these cases.
£350 million is what the allegation is, yeah.
Exactly. Which, by the way, is not far off from the truth.
Right.
I mean, the point is, Britain does pay that amount to the EU budget. It receives in return from other EU member states, not importantly from the EU itself, each year a £100 million rebate. But that rebate was ending anyway, and you could argue that Britain pays other sums on top of that amount that he pays to the budget, which would have brought it up to that figure of £350 million or close to it anyway. So, I mean, I don't even see that there's a case here on the facts. But more to the point, I don't see that there is a case here on the law, and this is a clear abuse of the law to meddle and interfere in a political process and in a democratic vote.
Yeah, and from the article that you sent me, which goes through the 350 million lawsuit that they're alleging against Boris Johnson, it lays out the example, and I'll quote it. It says, "If I send Fred 350 million per week, and then Jane and Eliza send me 100 million per week, that does not change the fact that I sent Fred 350 million per week. It does mean that saying I sent Fred 350 million per week is not the whole story, but it is not a lie." So that's basically the case that's being made, is they're saying that, okay, Boris Johnson is correct where he said the UK pays to the EU 350 million pounds per week. But then you have this rebate, which is being paid by member states, not the EU, back to the UK. Okay, so, when you deduct the rebate, it's less than 350 million, the net amount. But it doesn't mean that Boris Johnson is not saying the truth. He is saying the truth.
Well,
the UK pays 350 million per week.
I mean, it's bizarre because, frankly, with Boris Johnson, we know that Boris Johnson has a complicated relationship with the truth. And not just on this. He's said things. Let's say, for example, during the Skripal affair, which was demonstrably not true. He said at once, as I remember, that it had been confirmed conclusively that the poison that was used in the Skripal case had been proved to come from Russia. Well, it hadn't been, and never has been. But, that was not true. This comment was arguably true. But do we really start cases for misconduct of public office because of that? Of course not. Politicians sometimes lie, sometimes they tell the truth, sometimes they tell half lies and half truths, and sometimes they're very evasive. And with a politician like Boris Johnson, we know that that's what they do. But do we prosecute them every time? Misconduct of public office is a very serious offence. It is used, for example, when people take bribes, or when they abuse their position in order to favour friends, or when they're behaving in a corrupt way. There is nothing corrupt about this sort of behaviour. And I have to say, I am extremely concerned that the courts and the legal system is being used by obviously well-funded Remain groups to harass prominent leavers. And I am absolutely stunned that the courts are allowing this to happen.
Can you say that they're doing this to send a message to anyone that keeps on pushing the Leave narrative? Essentially that's what they're doing. They're saying if you push Leave, then we're going to smear you.
Well, indeed, that's exactly what it is. On the one hand, it harasses and puts immense pressure on people who were involved in supporting Leave. Not all of them, by the way, have the kind of resources and wealth to defend themselves against this sort of case that Boris Johnson does. Boris Johnson is a rich man, but not everybody else is, who supported Leave or who took a prominent role in the campaign. But the other agenda, and it's a very obvious agenda, and I touched on that when we talked about Aaron Banks, is to smear the people who supported or who campaigned for Leave in order to discredit them and, by extension, the campaign for Leave, to make it seem that the vote for leaving the European Union is tarnished in some way, when of course it's not. Can I just say, all sorts of things were said in that referendum. The worst lies were not said by people on the Leave side, they were said by people on the Remain side. They said that the economy would collapse, that there would need to be an emergency budget, that all kinds of economic consequences would follow. It was called Project Fear. And it turned out it wasn't true.
Very well put. Very well put. The biggest lies were told from those people that were pushing Remain.
Yeah.
I agree with that. But of course, now
Yes.
they're projecting it onto the Leave.
Well, but you know,
And
I
they're
think
doing more than projecting. Obviously,
yeah, I mean,
they're
exactly.
taking
I mean,
legal action. Yeah.
I think this is pretty calculated. I don't think this is just projection. I think this is a very, very calculated campaign, which has clearly been fairly well organised. And as I say, Boris Johnson and Aaron Banks are not the only targets. Several other people have been targeted in this way also.
They're playing very dirty. Very dirty.
Very, very, very dirty.
All right, Alex.